The sun blazed mercilessly over Arlington National Cemetery, its golden rays reflecting off the immaculate white marble of the tomb of the unknown soldier. The air shimmered with heat, yet the guard stood unmoving, his uniform immaculate, his eyes locked straight ahead, his ceremonial rifle resting precisely at his side. Around him, a crowd of tourists gathered, hushed by the weight of the place. For decades, the tomb had been guarded without pause, every hour, every day, in rain or snow. It wasn't just a post, it was a promise. Among the onlookers stood a man who did not share that reverence. Broad-shouldered, muscular, with a confident smirk etched across his face, he was a Delta Force operative on temporary assignment in D.C. Decorated, seasoned, and used to operating in shadows. He walked with the swagger of someone who believed he'd seen it all. That as the silence deepened, the operative stepped closer to the ceremonial chain, arms folded, eyes fixed on the guard. Then, in a voice loud enough for nearby tourists to hear, he chuckled. "Nice tattoo, soldier. You get that in basic, or at a theme park." The crowd shifted uneasily. A couple of tourists exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. The tattoo etched boldly on the guard's forearm wasn't decorative. It was a memorial, a symbol of sacrifice. But the operative didn't care. He continued, louder this time, making sure everyone around could hear. "All this standing still looks good for the cameras, but real soldiers don't pose. They fight." His words hung in the air like a stain, cutting through the sacred silence. Veterans in the crowd stiffened, their faces tightening with quiet anger. Parents gently pulled their children closer. A reporter lifted her phone, sensing that something was happening, and yet the guard did not move. He stood there, like a marble statue brought to life, his bearing perfect. No flicker in his eyes, no twitch in his jaw, but if one looked closer than the tourists dared, his fingers tightened around his rifle, just slightly, a silent pulse of emotion, buried beneath layers of discipline. The crowd thought the soldier would step back, but in the next moment, history saw what discipline truly means. Years before that blazing summer afternoon, the man standing motionless at the tomb had been a very different soldier. Back then, he was Specialist Ryan Cole, a young infantryman deployed to Afghanistan with his closest friend, Mac Harrison. They were more like brothers than comrades, two men bonded by war, sweat, and shared foxholes. They'd made a pact under a blistering desert sky. If one of us doesn't make it home, the other will keep the memory alive. Ryan was the steady one, quiet but fiercely loyal. Mac was the joker, the kind of soldier who could make an entire squad laugh even under fire. They balanced each other, but war has a way of breaking balances. On a dusty morning during their third month in Kandahar, their convoy rolled over a narrow bridge. Mac's vehicle hit a hidden IED, a flash, a roar, and then chaos. Ryan remembered sprinting toward the flames, hearing nothing but ringing in his ears. By the time he reached the wreckage, Mac was gone. Ryan didn't speak for 3 days after the memorial. When he finally returned to base, he walked into the makeshift tattoo tent and had Mac's initials and their unit insignia inked onto his forearm. It wasn't decoration. It was a promise carved into skin, a permanent oath that Mac would never be forgotten. After his service, Ryan was offered multiple career paths: private security, further deployment, even a transfer into special operations. But he turned them all down. Instead, he applied for one of the most grueling, precise, and least glamorous positions in the U.S. military: Tomb Sentinel at Arlington National Cemetery. Most people didn't understand. Standing guard, hour after hour, under sun and snow, in silence. Why would a combat veteran choose that? But Ryan knew why. If Mac doesn't have a grave to guard, then I'll guard the ones who have no names. The Sentinel training nearly broke him. The physical standards were brutal. The uniform inspections were legendary, every thread measured, every button polished until it mirrored the sun. He spent hours memorizing 35 pages of tomb history, learning exact marching sequences, and training his body to maintain bearing under any circumstance. But Ryan excelled not because it was easy, but because for him, perfection was a form of respect. While Ryan's journey forged his discipline, the antagonist's story forged arrogance. Master Sergeant David Knox was a Delta Force operative, legendary in some circles. He had served in secret missions overseas, carrying out high-risk operations few would ever know about. His career was decorated with medals and classified commendations, but somewhere along the way, his pride had outgrown his purpose. Delta operators often viewed ceremonial units as parade soldiers. To Knox, the tomb guards were just men in fancy uniforms, polishing shoes while others bled on the battlefield. He didn't hate them, but he didn't respect them either. And in his world, respect was everything. When Knox arrived at Arlington as part of a VIP delegation, he wore his casual clothes, sunglasses perched on his head. The visit wasn't official duty. It was a stop between briefings, a formality. To him, the tomb was a monument, not a living watch. But for Ryan Cole, that marble tomb wasn't just stone. It was sacred ground. The tomb of the unknown soldier represents every soldier whose name is lost, whose family never got closure. For over a century, guards have kept vigil, their 24/7 through storms, hurricanes, even when the cemetery itself shut down. The watch never ends. It's not about being seen. It's about honor when no one is looking. Ryan had taken his oath seriously. For him, each step on the mat was a tribute to Mac, and to the countless unknowns who had no one left to stand for them. On that day, as the Delta operator leaned against the chain, tourists saw two soldiers in the same uniform, but in truth, they came from two different worlds. Knox had spent his life fighting wars abroad, leading raids in darkness. Ryan had chosen to protect silence at home, holding a post that required stillness, precision, and emotional iron. Neither man was weak, but only one understood the language of the tomb. Veterans in the crowd recognized the guard's patch and stance instantly. Parents whispered to their children about the importance of silence here. A few older men removed their hats. It wasn't a performance. It was a ritual. Knox, however, saw something else. To him, Ryan's stillness looked like posing. His immaculate uniform looked like showmanship, and the tattoo Mac's initials, burned into Ryan's arm, looked to Knox like the kind of ink soldiers got when they wanted to look tough. He didn't see the story behind it. He just saw a target for mockery. And that misunderstanding, born of pride and ignorance, was about to ignite a moment that would echo across the internet, military circles, and the hearts of millions. Ryan didn't flinch when Knox laughed. He'd heard worse in the field, but here, at the tomb, there were lines you didn't cross. And as Knox edged closer, a few veterans in the crowd sensed it. Something was about to happen. The heat pressed down on Arlington like a heavy, invisible hand. The marble tomb reflected the sun's glare, bathing the scene in an almost blinding white light. A solemn hush had fallen over the crowd, the kind of silence that commands respect, not requests it. But in that sacred silence, David Knox's arms crossed. Shades glinting was the only voice that dared to rise. He leaned forward over the ceremonial chain, his stance casual, as if standing before the most hallowed post in the nation was just another stop on his afternoon stroll. A crooked smile played on his face. "Tell me, statue man," he said, just loud enough for the nearest dozen tourists to hear. "How long do they make you stand here before you can blink?" A few nervous chuckles scattered through the crowd. Some thought he was joking. Others immediately sensed the disrespect. Veterans in the audience turned their heads slowly, their expressions hardening. Ryan Cole didn't move. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, chin level, rifle precisely angled. His bearing was flawless, the same unbroken stance every tomb guard must hold regardless of who stands before them. Knox, mistaking silence for weakness, stepped closer. "What's the tattoo for?" he asked, pointing casually at Ryan's forearm. "Got bored during basic. Wanted to look like the tough guys." The words hung in the hot air like smoke. Ryan's tattoo Mac's initials intertwined with their unit insignia wasn't just ink. It was a memorial carved into skin, a promise to the dead. Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. Tomb guards don't speak to the public unless to enforce rules. That silence, the sacred silence of the guard, was more powerful than any insult Knox could hurl. But to Knox, the stillness was infuriating. He'd spent his career in action, in chaos, where loud commands and fast reactions ruled the day. He didn't understand stillness, so he mocked it. "Bet you've never even seen a real firefight," he muttered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Standing here, playing soldier while the real ones do the work." That line made a few veterans in the crowd visibly tense. One older man in a Vietnam veteran cap clenched his fists and whispered, "Watch your mouth, son." Another woman, holding the hand of her young daughter, quietly moved back, sensing the tension swelling like a rising tide. A reporter at the back raised her phone higher, hitting record. Ryan's mind was a fortress of discipline, but deep inside, old memories flickered. He saw the fireball on that bridge, Max laughed at the night before, the sandstorm that followed the funeral. Every insult Knox threw wasn't aimed at him, it was aimed at Mac, at the oath he carried. Still, he stood firm. His training mantra echoed inside. "My standard will remain perfection." Through the night, through the storm, he would not break bearing, not for Knox, not for anyone. Knox wasn't satisfied with whispers anymore. He wanted an audience. He turned to the crowd, voice louder, more performative. "Ladies and gentlemen, the human statue, he announced with a theatrical wave of his hand. Perfect posture, perfect silence, and a tattoo to make it all look hardcore. Some in the crowd gasped. A few kids laughed in it because they understood, but because Knox's tone invited it. Others stood in rigid silence, their respect for the tomb clashing with this man's arrogance. The tension thickened. Veterans exchanged sharp glances. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Knox moved closer again, until his boots were nearly touching the ceremonial clear boundary that separates the guard's path from the public. That chain is sacred. Crossing it without permission isn't just rude, it's a direct challenge to the guard's authority and to the sanctity of the tomb. Ryan's peripheral vision caught the movement. His muscles tensed beneath the pressed fabric of his uniform, but his face remained a mask. The rhythmic sound of his heartbeat merged with the count. In his head, the endless cycle of 21 seconds of stillness. 21 steps, 21 seconds. Knox tilted his head, mocking. Come on, statue. Say something. You're a soldier, right? Or just a mannequin with a rifle? The crowd's mood shifted entirely now. This was no longer awkward banter, was open disrespect. A group of Marines on leave, standing quietly in the back, exchanged looks that said everything. One muttered under his breath, "He's crossing a line." A little boy on his father's shoulders whispered, "Dad, why is that man being mean to the soldier?" His father hushed him softly, "Because he doesn't understand." Reporters now had their cameras up. The moment had drawn attention. A few live streams began, broadcasting the unfolding scene online. Ryan's commander, watching from a shaded area nearby, clenched his jaw. He knew the protocol. Ryan had to hold his bearing until a physical boundary was crossed. Only then could the guard respond. Knox, unaware he was walking into history, took that exact step. He placed his foot on the ceremonial chain, leaning his upper body forward, his face now only inches from Ryan's tattoo. The crowd collectively inhaled. You could hear the wind rustle the trees, the distant footsteps of another guard, and nothing else. Knox whispered, low but clear enough to carry, "That tattoo's nothing. Real soldiers don't need reminders, they live it every day." A hush, like the pause before a lightning strike, filled the air. Veterans' jaws clenched. A Marine muttered, "Oh no." Ryan's hand tightened slightly on his rifle. His body was still, his eyes never wavered, but something in the atmosphere shifted, a current of unseen electricity, waiting for the inevitable spark. Knox smiled, thinking he'd won the silent contest, but he didn't realize that in the guard's world, silence isn't surrender. It's the calm before the storm. Behind him, several tourists started whispering nervously. One woman pulled out her phone and whispered to her husband, "This is going viral." And she was right. Cameras captured every angle. The entire world would soon witness what happens when arrogance meets unshakable discipline. Ryan inhaled slowly. The way he'd been trained to control everything, including emotion. He focused on the sacred oath etched into his memory. Through the night, through the storm, my standard will remain perfection. Knox crossed the chain fully now, boots landing on the guard's mat, though one place no civilian is ever meant to stand. The crowd froze. Veterans' eyes went wide. The Marine in the back whispered, "He just made the biggest mistake of his life." And Ryan Colton, Sentinel veteran, brother in arms to a fallen friend, stood at the precipice. Between silence and action, the line had been crossed. What came next would silence an entire crowd, shake Knox to his core, and echo far beyond the marble walls of Arlington. For a few timeless seconds, the world seemed to stop breathing. The crowd's whispers evaporated into silence. The summer air hung still, even the birds circling above. Arlington froze in the collective tension below. David Knox, boots planted arrogantly on the sacred black mat where no civilian was ever permitted, stood with a mocking half-smile, as if daring the sentinel to do something. Ryan Cole, guard of the tomb of the unknown soldier, stared straight ahead. He did not flinch. He did not blink. But inside, a switch had flipped. This was no longer verbal disrespect. This was a violation of sacred ground, and there is a very specific protocol for this moment. Ryan shifted. It was subtle, so subtle that at first, the crowd didn't register what was happening. But then, his heels snapped sharply against the mat, echoing like a gunshot through the silent air. In a precise, practiced motion, he brought his rifle up to port arms, the ceremonial position of readiness. The movement was fluid, exact to the millimeter. Then his voice rang out clear, booming, and trained to carry across hundreds of feet. "It is requested that you remain behind the chains and railings." The command cut through the summer air like a blade. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Children flinched. Veterans stood taller. Tourists froze with wide eyes. Even Knox's cocky grin faltered for a split second. Ryan's voice wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was the voice of the tomb itself, calm, commanding, and absolute. Knox took half a step back, surprised. He hadn't expected the guard to speak, but Arrogance dies slowly. He laughed it off, raising his hands mockingly. Oh, so the statue talks after all. He made no effort to move back behind the chain. That was his second mistake. Ryan's training was clear. If the violation continued after the warning, the next response was physical repositioning and command escalation. His body pivoted with ceremonial precision. He took a single step forward, the heel of his boot striking the mat with a crack that echoed across the tomb plaza. His eyes remained fixed forward, but his entire presence radiated authority. The rifle was firm against his shoulder, every inch of him a symbol of century-old discipline. The crowd was dead silent. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Knox, still not fully grasping the gravity, leaned forward again as if to reclaim control. Relax, man. I'm just messing around, he muttered. But this wasn't a playground. This was hallowed ground. Behind the crowd, a veteran whispered hoarsely to his son. He has no idea what he just walked into. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A reporter zoomed in her camera lens. The live stream view counts began climbing rapidly as the scene unfolded in real time. Ryan's voice thundered again. Exactly as protocol dictated, IT has requested that you maintain a respectful distance at all times. Each syllable was crisp, like a drill instructor's cadence. Knox took another step back now, this time not entirely by choice. His confidence wavered. The shift in power was palpable. What began as a joke in his mind had transformed into a moment he no longer controlled. The audience had turned against him. Where there were once awkward chuckles, there were now cold stares. Veterans, Marines, tourists everywhere was fixed on Knox like he was standing trial. Then something unexpected happened as Ryan resumed his posture, rifle snapping back down with flawless precision. A hush even deeper than before settled. The weight of tradition, carried by generations of soldiers, pressed down on that plaza. Knox suddenly felt it. The gravity of where he was, the eyes of the unknown fallen. The living symbol standing before him unshaken. And for the first time, his smirk faded completely. But the moment wasn't over. 2 military police officers, stationed discreetly nearby, began moving in from the side comm but alert. Their presence wasn't theatrical. It was standard procedure. No one steps on the mat without consequence. Knox noticed them too. His eyes darted briefly, betraying his sudden unease. Ryan, meanwhile, had already reset into his 21-step watch. He executed his turn with the same exacting precision, began his slow, measured pacing along the mat as if nothing had happened, and that's what hit Knox the hardest. The guard didn't argue. He didn't scold. He didn't break discipline. He handled the violation, issued the warning, and then returned to duty like a living embodiment of the tomb itself. The message was clear. This is bigger than you. The crowd began whispering again, but this time it wasn't nervous laughter. It was, "Ow, did you hear that?" One tourist whispered. "That was incredible," said another. "Man, he didn't even flinch." A Marine muttered under his breath. "Impressed." Children stared at Ryan like they were seeing a hero from a history book step off the page. Veterans stood with quiet pride, recognizing the discipline they'd once worn like a second skin. And Knox stood alone, realizing he'd just been put in his place not by anger but by honor. As the MPs reached him, one of them quietly said, "Sir, step back behind the chain." Knox complied. There was no fight left. His arrogance had been swallowed by the weight of tradition. He stepped back over the chain and into the public area where he belonged. The mat remained untouched now, save for Ryan's deliberate, rhythmic footsteps. For the next minute, the only sound was the guard's measured pace, echoing with centuries of discipline. And in that moment, the entire crowd understood. This wasn't just a soldier standing still. This was a tradition standing firm. Somewhere in the back, a child whispered to his mother, "He's like a superhero." The mother smiled softly, eyes still fixed on the guard. "No, sweetheart," she said. "He's something even rarer. He's a soldier who never moves." The sun hung high, casting long, crisp shadows across the marble of Arlington. Ryan Cole resumed his measured 21-step march, each footfall striking the mat with precise, unwavering authority. Every onlooker in the crowd felt it, the power of absolute discipline radiating in every step. David Knox, now fully aware of his miscalculation, stood several feet back behind the ceremonial chain. His shades could no longer hide the flicker of unease in his eyes. The joke he intended to play had completely backfired. Every mocking smirk, every careless word, had been absorbed and transformed into a lesson in restraint and honor. Two military police officers approached quietly, their movements subtle but deliberate. They flanked Knox, gently but firmly guiding him further from the mat. "Sir, you need to step back," one officer said calmly. Knox opened his mouth to argue, to laugh it off, but found he had nothing left to say. His bravado had evaporated under the weight of centuries of tradition, the presence of veterans, and the steady, unshakable stare of the tomb guard. The crowd held its breath. Phones were raised. Cameras captured the unfolding scene. Every tourist, veteran, and military family member in the plaza recognized something profound had happened. Knox, finally compliant, moved to the edge of the public area, realizing he was the one being corrected. The humiliation was subtle, quiet but devastating for a man who thrived on power and control. Ryan didn't need to say a word. His calm, methodical actions spoke volumes. The discipline of the tomb guard, the centuries of honor, and the sacred oath to those unknown soldiers overshadowed Knox's arrogance completely. A veteran in the back murmured to his companion, "Discipline over chaos." Every time, a young woman holding her child whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." And then it happened, the viral moment. A reporter's camera, capturing the confrontation in real time, zoomed in on Ryan's tattoo, Mac's initials intertwined with the unit insignia. The symbolism was unmistakable. The crowd gasped collectively. It wasn't just a tattoo, it was a story of sacrifice, loss, and unwavering honor. Knox, standing there, suddenly realized the enormity of the mistake he had made. Every mocking word, every casual step onto the sacred mat, had been recorded, replayed, and immortalized. Even the general, who had been observing from a distance with a mixture of curiosity and concern, now stepped forward. He saluted not Knox, but Ryan. "Well done, Sentinel," the general said, his voice low but commanding. "You've upheld the highest standards of this duty." The crowd erupted in whispers, murmurs of awe traveling quickly from one end of the plaza to the other. Children pointed, veterans nodded in silent approval, and the tourist with the phone captured every detail. Knox stood there, muted by the authority of the guard and the unshakable legacy of the tomb. He understood that his reputation as a soldier in the field meant nothing here. This was a battlefield of honor, and he had been soundly defeated without a single blow. Ryan, meanwhile, calmly returned to his post at the tomb, rifle perfectly aligned, posture immaculate, eyes unwavering. Every step he took reinforced a truth older than any soldier in the crowd. Discipline transcends ego. Tradition outlasts arrogance. Silence can speak louder than words. The officers escorted Knox away, his face tight with a mix of frustration and respect he could not yet articulate. The crowd followed Ryan with their eyes, capturing every moment of his steady pacing, his ritual turn, and the solemnity of his duty. Even the child who had whispered superhero earlier now looked on in quiet reverence, the magnitude of the moment sinking in. "That man, he's a hero," the child murmured again, almost to himself. It was not an exaggeration. Across the plaza, cameras, phones, and live streams were already sending the footage into the world. Millions would witness how a single tomb guard, standing silent and unwavering, could command respect, restore honor, and humble even the most arrogant soldier. For Ryan Cole, however, it was just another step in the march. The post continued, the ritual continued, and the sacred vigil went on. He did not celebrate, did not gloat. His victory was quiet, deliberate, and absolute. In the end, the Delta Force operative had been exposed not through force, but through the unshakable power of discipline and respect for tradition. The crowd would remember it, the footage would go viral, and the lesson of the tomb guard would echo far beyond Arlington. The plaza slowly exhaled. The crowd's murmur returned, soft but reverent this time. The tension that had gripped Arlington like a vice began to lift, leaving behind a quiet awe. Phones were still raised, cameras still recording, but now the focus was not on conflicted, was on honor preserved. Ryan Cole returned to his post with the same deliberate precision as always. Each step along the mat was measured, exact, almost ceremonial in its rhythm. His rifle rested perfectly at his side, polished and ready, and his posture remained flawless. To an outsider, nothing had changed, but those who had watched closely, veterans, military families, even tourists, understood the depth of what had just occurred. The general, still observing, approached Ryan quietly. He stopped a few paces away, eyes scanning the guard from head to toe. For a moment, the world seemed suspended in respect. Then, without a word, he raised his hand and saluted. Ryan returned the salute with a nod, a gesture both simple and profound. No words were necessary. The act itself spoke volumes, recognition of discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. A little boy who had been perched on his father's shoulders whispered again, almost inaudibly, "Hero." Ryan's eyes flicked briefly to the child. He allowed himself the smallest, almost imperceptible smile, not for glory, but because he understood that honor is most meaningful when it inspires others. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Ryan reached down and touched his tattoo, lightly maxed initials and unit insignia, etched permanently into his forearm. His fingers lingered for a moment. Memories of the past, of lost friends, of bridges crossed and battles fought flooded his mind. He traced the design carefully, whispering under his breath, "This one's for you, brother." His dog tags shifted against his chest as he straightened. He glanced at the tomb, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and solemn remembrance. This vigil was never about recognition. It was about service, respect, and memory. The world might witness it, cameras might capture it, but the true reward was knowing that the fallen were honored and the oath was kept. Even the Delta Force operative, escorted quietly by the MPs, cast a glance back. There was no sneer now, only a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement. He had learned something fundamental. Power without respect is fragile. Arrogance without understanding is meaningless. Ryan hadn't shouted, hadn't lashed out, yet the lesson was etched into the memory of every person present. Ryan adjusted his uniform and resumed his pacing with the precision and calmness that defined his service. Each step resonated with a quiet rhythm of eternity, echoing the countless guardians who had stood before him. He felt the weight of responsibility, yes, but also the weight of pride. Pride in the tradition, in the history, and in the oath that had carried him through both war and peace. As he completed his rotation, Ryan allowed himself a brief reflection. The tattoo, the medal pinned to his chest, the dog tags, these were symbols. Yes, but the true measure of honor was in action, in restraint, in fidelity to duty even under provocation. And on that sun-drenched afternoon at Arlington, that measure had been witnessed by thousands, recorded by countless cameras, and would echo far beyond the confines of the cemetery. The tomb remained silent, eternal, and guarded, and Ryan Cole, sentinel of the unknown soldier, stood unmoved, a living testament to the enduring power of discipline, courage, and respect. The sun began its slow descent over Arlington National Cemetery, casting long shadows across the marble and grass. The plaza was quiet now, the echoes of the confrontation fading into memory. But the lesson lingered, a truth far older and stronger than any single man's arrogance. Discipline is not weakness. Stillness is not passivity. The sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier had shown that true strength lies in unwavering commitment to honor, tradition, and respect. In a world that often rewards loudness and brashness, RyanColes.com. Measured response spoke louder than any shout, louder than any act of aggression. Children and adults alike had witnessed it. Veterans nodded in silent acknowledgement. Tourists shared what they saw online. And somewhere, a little boy's whisper, "Hero," would carry farther than Knox's arrogance ever could. Ryan's story reminds us that true courage is not always in the fight we seek. Sometimes it is in standing firm when provoked, in honoring the past, and in carrying forward a legacy with dignity. The tomb guard's actions were a testament to everything the uniform represents: sacrifice, loyalty, and unwavering resolve. Thus, as the cameras and phones slowly lowered, the narrative was clear. It wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about embodying the principles that the fallen gave their lives for. That silent, steadfast presence would resonate far beyond Arlington, teaching the world that honor is preserved by those who respect it most. If this story inspired you, remember to share it with others, to honor the men and women who serve with integrity, and to reflect on the power of discipline in your own life. Support tradition, respect courage, and never underestimate the strength of stillness in the face of arrogance, because sometimes the quietest action leaves the loudest legacy.